The dust hung in the air like a veil of amber silk, catching the last light of day as it settled over the sprawling ranch that stretched endlessly toward the purple mountains. Thomas Brennan stood on his porch, one weathered hand gripping the wooden rail, watching the horizon with eyes that had seen too much loneliness for a man of 35. The ranch had been in his family for 3 generations, carved from wilderness by his grandfather's calloused hands, expanded by his father's determination, and now maintained by his own stubborn refusal to let it fall to ruin. But the house behind him felt hollow, echoing with the absence of the family he'd always imagined would fill it. He'd built the place up over the years since his parents passed, hiring good men, breeding strong cattle, establishing himself as one of the most respected ranchers in 3 counties. Yet every night he returned to empty rooms and cold dinners, and every morning he woke to silence that pressed against his chest like a physical weight. His friends had long since married, filled their homes with children and laughter, while Thomas remained alone with his land and his horses, and the endless work that never quite filled the void. The sound of hoofbeats pulled him from his thoughts. His foreman, Jake Martinez, was riding hard from the eastern pasture, kicking up clouds of dust that turned gold in the fading light. Thomas stepped down from the porch, his instincts telling him something was wrong before Jake even opened his mouth. The older man pulled his horse to a stop, breathing hard, his weathered face creased with concern. "Found something out by Miller's Creek," Jake said, swinging down from his saddle. "Someone. A woman. Looks like she's been traveling rough for days. She's half-starved, boss, and scared out of her mind. Won't tell me nothing about where she came from or where she's headed." Thomas felt his jaw tighten. The territories were dangerous for anyone traveling alone, but especially for a woman. Outlaws, harsh weather, hostile encounters. Any number of things could leave someone stranded or worse. "Where is she now?" Brought her to the bunkhouse. "Maria's with her, trying to get some food into her." Jake's wife Maria served as the ranch's cook and de facto nurse for injuries that didn't require the doctor from town. "But Thomas, there's something you should know. She's got marks on her wrists, like she was tied up. And she keeps looking over her shoulder, like she's expecting someone to come after her." They walked together toward the smaller building that served as the bunkhouse, where the ranch hand stayed during cattle drives and busy seasons. Thomas could hear Maria's gentle voice through the door, speaking in soothing tones. When he stepped inside, he saw her sitting on a wooden chair, wrapped in a blanket despite the warmth of the evening, her dark hair hanging in tangled waves around a face that might have been beautiful if it weren't so hollowed by fear and exhaustion. She looked up when Thomas entered, and he saw her entire body tense, ready to bolt. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, wide and wary, searching his face for signs of threat. He stopped several feet away, removing his hat in a gesture of respect, keeping his movements slow and unthreatening. "Ma'am," he said quietly. "I'm Thomas Brennan. This is my ranch. You're safe here. Nobody's going to hurt you." She stared at him for a long moment, those gray eyes trying to decide if his words were truth or trap. Maria placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, and Thomas saw the woman flinch before forcing herself to remain still. "It's all right, Mijita," Maria murmured. "Mr. Brennan is a good man. One of the best I've known. What's your name?" Thomas asked, crouching down so he was at her eye level rather than towering over her. Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper, rough from dessous or screaming or both. "Eleanor. Eleanor Wade. Well, Miss Wade, you look like you've been through something terrible. You don't have to tell me about it if you don't want to, but you need rest and food and time to heal. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need." Something flickered in her eyes, hope mixed with disbelief, as though kindness was a language she'd forgotten how to understand. "You don't know me. You don't know what I might have done. I know you're hurt and scared, and that's enough for now." Thomas stood, settling his hat back on his head. "Maria will get you settled in the guest room in the main house. It's got a lock on the inside of the door. You can rest easy knowing nobody will bother you." Over the following days, Thomas learned Eleanor's story in fragments, Pieces she offered slowly, like a person testing ice, to see if it would hold their weight. She'd been married to a man named Marcus Wade, a prosperous merchant in Kansas City who'd presented himself as a gentleman during their courtship. Within weeks of their wedding, the mask had slipped, revealing a man consumed by jealousy and rage, who saw his wife as property to be controlled rather than a person to be cherished. She'd endured it for 2 years, the bruises hidden beneath long sleeves, the fear concealed behind practiced smiles. But when she'd finally gathered the courage to leave, taking only what she could carry, Marcus had tracked her down within days. He'd hired men to drag her back, keeping her locked in their home like a prisoner. She'd escaped a second time during a fire that broke out in the neighboring building, slipping away in the chaos while Marcus directed the bucket brigade. This time she'd run farther, traveling by night, avoiding towns and main roads, eating what she could forage or steal, until exhaustion and hunger had finally collapsed her near Miller's Creek. Thomas listened to her story with a growing fury that he kept carefully controlled, not wanting to frighten her with displays of anger, even when it wasn't directed at her. He'd known men like Marcus Wade, men who mistook control for strength, who believed their word was law within their own homes. Thomas had seen what such men left in their wake: broken women, traumatized children, families destroyed by violence masquerading as discipline. "He'll come looking for me," Eleanor said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of crimson and gold. "Marcus doesn't let things go. He'll see it as a matter of pride now, reclaiming what belongs to him." "You don't belong to anyone but yourself," Thomas said firmly. "And if he comes here, he'll find this ranch isn't like Kansas City. Out here, a man's word is backed by his actions, and I've got 20 good men who stand with me." Eleanor looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Why are you helping me? You barely know me. I've brought nothing but trouble to your door." Thomas was quiet for a moment, watching a hawk circle in the distance, considering his words carefully. "My mother used to say that the measure of a person isn't what they do when it's easy, but what they do when it costs them something. Helping you is the right thing to do. That's reason enough." As weeks passed, Eleanor began to emerge from the shell of fear that had encased her. Color returned to her cheeks, and the haunted look in her eyes gradually softened. She made herself useful around the ranch, helping Maria with cooking and mending, tending the vegetable garden, even learning to handle some of the gentler horses. Thomas found himself looking forward to their conversations in the evening, discovering a sharp intelligence and dry humor beneath her trauma. She spoke of books she'd read, dreams she'd once harbored of teaching school or traveling to California, a whole life that had been suffocated by her marriage. Thomas, in turn, shared pieces of himself he'd kept private for years. He spoke of his parents, his father's stern kindness, and his mother's gentle wisdom. He talked about the responsibility he felt to honor their legacy, the pressure of maintaining something they'd built with such sacrifice. He admitted to the loneliness that had become his constant companion, the way the ranch sometimes felt more like a beautiful prison than a home. "You could change that," Eleanor said one evening. "You could marry, have a family. There must be women in town who'd jump at the chance." Thomas smiled ruefully. "Maybe. But I never seemed to find one who understood what this life requires. Most women who'd be interested in a rancher want the security without the isolation, the land without the hard work. I need a partner, not someone I have to protect from reality." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. "That's what I wanted once. A true partnership. Someone who'd see me as an equal instead of a possession." She looked down at her hands, still bearing faint scars from her journey. "I thought Marcus was that person. I was so wrong. Not all men are like him," Thomas said gently. "Some of us still believe marriage should be built on respect and trust, not ownership and fear." The peaceful rhythm of ranch life was shattered on a scorching afternoon in late July. Thomas was working with Jake to repair fence posts in the northern pasture when one of the younger hands came riding at full gallop, his face flushed with urgency. "Mr. Brennan, there's men at the house. Fancy city types. They're asking about a woman. And they've got papers that say you're harboring someone's wife." Thomas felt ice settle in his gut. He mounted his horse without a word, riding hard back to the main house with Jake close behind. He could see them before he arrived. 3 men standing near the porch. 2 of them clearly hired muscle despite their suits, and 1 man in expensive clothing that looked absurd in the dusty ranch yard. Marcus Wade had found her. Thomas dismounted slowly, every movement deliberate and controlled. "This is private property. State your business and be quick about it." Marcus Wade was a tall man with slicked back hair and a face that might have been handsome, if not for the cruelty in his eyes. "Thomas Brennan, I presume. I'm Marcus Wade, and I've come for my wife. I have it on good authority that she's here, and I have legal documents stating that she belongs with me. People don't belong to other people." That ended with the emancipation, Thomas said evenly. "And if you're talking about Miss Wade, she's a guest on my ranch, here of her own free will." "Miss Wade?" Marcus laughed, though there was no humor in it. "That's Mrs. Wade, legally bound to me by marriage. She's confused, unwell. She needs to come home where she can receive proper care." Thomas saw Eleanor then, standing in the doorway with Maria behind her. Her face had gone pale, and she was trembling, but she hadn't run. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Marcus," she called out, her voice stronger than Thomas had ever heard it. "I'm done being your prisoner." Marcus's face darkened with rage. "You're my wife. You made those vows in front of everyone. You'll come home and accept your proper place, or I'll drag you back by your hair if I have to." Thomas stepped between Marcus and the house, his hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. "That won't be happening. The lady has made her choice clear, and you need to respect it and leave. Stay out of this, rancher. This is a private matter between husband and wife. It stopped being private when you threatened violence on my property." Thomas's voice was low and deadly calm. "I'm giving you one chance to ride away peaceful. Take it." Marcus's hired men moved their hands toward their weapons, but suddenly they found themselves surrounded. Jake had positioned himself to Thomas's right, and the ranch hands had appeared from seemingly nowhere, all armed, all watching the intruders with hard eyes. These weren't gunfighters or outlaws. They were working men defending their home and their own. That made them more dangerous, not less. Marcus looked around, calculating odds he didn't like. "This isn't over," he spat. "I'll get the sheriff involved. I'll get federal marshals if I have to. She's my wife by law, and law will return her to me." "Maybe," Thomas acknowledged. "But until then, she stays here under my protection. And Marcus, if you or anyone working for you sets foot on my land again without being invited, it won't be a conversation. It'll be a burial." The threat hung in the air, backed by 20 guns and the weight of territorial justice that often moved faster than federal law. Marcus Wade stared at Thomas with pure hatred, but he wasn't stupid enough to force a fight he couldn't win. He climbed back onto his horse, his hired men following suit. "You're making a powerful enemy, Brennan. I hope your ranch can survive what's coming." They rode away, and Thomas didn't move until they were out of sight. Only then did he allow himself to breathe, turning to find Eleanor standing on the porch with tears streaming down her face. "He'll destroy you," she whispered. "He'll use every connection he has to ruin this ranch. I should leave before he brings more trouble." Thomas climbed the steps, standing before her with his hat in his hands. "Eleanor, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Do you want to stay here, more than anything?" she said without hesitation. "But then stay as my wife." The words hung between them, stunning them both with their suddenness. Thomas hadn't planned to say it, hadn't thought through the implications, but the moment the words left his mouth, he knew they were true. Eleanor stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. "Thomas, you can't. You don't have to." "I'm not offering out of pity or obligation," he interrupted gently. "These past weeks, having you here, talking with you every evening, watching you laugh with Maria, seeing you find your strength again. Eleanor, you've made this house feel like a home for the first time in years. I know this isn't a conventional proposal. I know you've got every reason to be wary of marriage, after what you endured. But I'm asking anyway, because I think we could build something real together. A partnership based on respect and choice, not ownership and fear. Eleanor's hands were shaking. If I marry you, Marcus's claim is broken. But Thomas, that's not a reason to tie yourself to someone. You deserve better than a marriage of convenience. Who says it would be just convenience? Thomas asked softly. I've come to care for you, Eleanor. More than I probably should have in such a short time. I can't promise I'll be perfect. But I can promise I'll never raise a hand to you, never try to control you, never treat you as anything less than my equal partner. If you say yes, it would be because you want to, not because you have to. And if you say no, you can still stay here as long as you need, protected just the same. Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the earnest sincerity in his weathered face. The steady strength that had nothing to do with physical power and everything to do with character. She thought about the life she'd escaped, the prison her first marriage had become, and compared it to the freedom she'd found here. She thought about the gentle way Thomas moved around her, always giving her space to choose, never demanding or expecting. She thought about the evenings on the porch, the conversations that had shown her a kind of companionship she'd never known existed. Please don't send me back, she whispered, the words breaking on a sob. Please, Thomas. I can't go back to that life. Thomas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hands in his. Then stay as my wife, Eleanor. Stay and help me build something worth fighting for. She looked down at their joined hands, his rough and calloused from years of hard work, her scarred from her desperate flight to freedom. Slowly she nodded. Yes, I'll marry you. The wedding took place 3 days later, performed by a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through. Maria and Jake served as witnesses, along with the ranch hands who'd become Eleanor's unlikely protectors. It was a simple ceremony held in the ranch house parlor. With wildflowers Maria had picked that morning and a ring Thomas's mother had worn, kept safe in a drawer for years waiting for the right woman to wear it again. Eleanor wore a simple blue dress Maria had altered to fit her, and when Thomas took her hand to slide the ring onto her finger, she didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, she looked into his eyes and saw not possession but promise, not ownership but opportunity. When the preacher pronounced them married and Thomas leaned in to kiss her, he paused just before their lips met, giving her one last chance to refuse. She closed the distance herself, choosing him as much as he'd chosen her. Marcus Wade made good on his threats. He filed complaints with the territorial governor, claiming Thomas had harbored a runaway wife and coerced her into an illegal marriage. But the legal ground was murky. Eleanor had been married to Marcus in Kansas City, but that marriage had been marked by documented violence that several witnesses were willing to testify about. Her marriage to Thomas was performed by a legitimate preacher with proper documentation. The territorial courts, already overburdened and generally sympathetic to frontier justice, were slow to act on Marcus's complaints. Meanwhile, Marcus tried other tactics. He spread rumors about Thomas in neighboring towns, attempting to damage his business relationships. He hired investigators to dig up dirt, looking for anything that might discredit Thomas or cast doubt on Eleanor's character. But Thomas had lived his entire life, building a reputation for honesty and fairness, and the people who knew him weren't swayed by a bitter stranger's accusations. Eleanor, for her part, bloomed in the safety Thomas provided. She took to ranch life with surprising adaptability, learning to keep books and manage supplies, treating injured animals with gentle competence, even learning to ride well enough to check on distant pastures. The ranch hands, initially uncertain about having a woman around full time, came to respect her quick mind and genuine interest in their work. She remembered their names, asked about their families, treated them with a dignity that earned fierce loyalty. The marriage itself evolved slowly, carefully, with both of them navigating uncertain territory. Thomas never pushed for physical intimacy beyond what Eleanor offered, understanding that her experiences had left wounds deeper than what showed on her skin. They shared a bedroom but gave each other space, letting trust build gradually through small gestures. His hand on the small of her back as they walked, her fingers combing through his hair, when he returned exhausted from long days, goodnight kisses that deepened from chaste to passionate, as she learned to associate touch with tenderness rather than pain. 6 months after their wedding, during a cold November evening with snow beginning to fall, Eleanor found Thomas in the barn checking on a mare about to foal. She stood in the doorway watching him work, this man who'd given her back her life, and asked nothing in return except that she stay. He looked up and smiled, that quiet smile that had become her favorite sight in the world. "She'll deliver soon," he said, stroking the mare's neck. "Probably tonight. I'll need to stay with her." Eleanor stepped into the barn, closing the door behind her against the cold. "Then I'll stay too." They sat together in the hay, sharing a blanket and keeping watch. Thomas told her stories about other foals born on the ranch, his voice low and soothing in the quiet barn. Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the absolute safety of his presence. "I never thanked you properly," she said quietly, "for saving my life, for giving me a home, for treating me like I matter." Thomas turned to look at her, his eyes serious in the lamplight. "You do matter, Eleanor. You matter to this ranch, to the people here, and you matter to me. I know this marriage started as protection, but somewhere along the way, it became real for me. If it hasn't for you, I understand." She silenced him with a kiss, pouring into it everything she'd been afraid to say. When she'd pulled back, her eyes were bright with tears. "It's real for me too. I think it has been for a while. I was just scared to believe I could be this happy, that someone could actually love me without wanting to own me." "I do love you," Thomas said simply. Not the broken woman who showed up half dead at Miller's Creek, and not the grateful wife who's repaying a debt. I love the Eleanor who challenges me when I'm being stubborn, who laughs at Jake's terrible jokes, who cries over baby calves and keeps books more precisely than any accountant. I love who you are, all of you, and I'm grateful every day that you chose to stay. Eleanor felt something inside her chest crack open, some final wall she'd kept up crumbling away. "I love you too. I love you so much it terrifies me." The mare chose that moment to begin her labor in earnest, and they turned their attention to helping her, working together with practiced ease. When the foal finally slipped into the world, wet and gangly and perfect, Eleanor laughed with pure joy. Thomas wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him without fear or hesitation. Just two people sharing a moment of new life and new beginnings. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and coaxing green from the earth. Eleanor discovered she was pregnant on a morning when the world smelled like rain and fresh grass. She told Thomas over breakfast, watching his face carefully for any sign of anger or resentment. Responses she'd learned to expect from Marcus, whenever her body failed to conform to his demands. Instead, Thomas's face lit up with a joy so pure it made her chest ache. He stood up so quickly his chair fell over, then seemed uncertain what to do with his hands before settling on cupping her face gently. "Are you sure? Are you happy about it?" "I'm terrified," she admitted. "But yes, I'm happy. Are you?" "Eleanor, you've given me everything I never let myself hope for. A partner, a home that feels alive, and now a child." His voice broke slightly. "I'm more than happy. I'm blessed." The news spread through the ranch quickly, greeted with genuine celebration. Maria immediately began planning, insisting Eleanor rest more despite Eleanor's protests that she felt fine. Jake carved a cradle from cedar wood, intricate and beautiful. The ranch hands, tough men who spent their days breaking horses and driving cattle, became absurdly protective, rushing to help Eleanor with any task heavier than a teacup. Marcus Wade appeared one final time in June, showing up at the ranch with a federal marshal in tow. Thomas met them at the property line, backed by his men, while Eleanor watched from the porch with one hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. The marshal was an older man named Robertson, weathered and pragmatic. He looked over the scene, the thriving ranch, the unified men, the pregnant woman clearly comfortable in her home, and then looked at Marcus Wade's documents with obvious skepticism. "Mr. Wade claims you're holding his wife against her will," Robertson said to Thomas. "That's a serious accusation. Then let's ask her." Thomas replied calmly. "Eleanor, do you want to go with Mr. Wade?" Eleanor stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering. "I am not Mr. Wade's wife. I was once, and during that time he beat me, imprisoned me, and treated me as less than human. I escaped that marriage, and I entered freely into a new marriage with Thomas Brennan, a man who has shown me nothing but respect and kindness. I'm carrying his child, Marshall Robertson, and this ranch is my home. I will never willingly return to Marcus Wade." Robertson studied her, seeing the truth in her eyes and her bearing, the obvious pregnancy, the absence of fear when she looked at Thomas. He turned to Marcus with barely concealed disgust. "Mr. Wade, I've seen enough frontier justice to know when to interfere and when to walk away. This woman is clearly here of her own choice, legally married to another man, and expecting a child. Your claim ended the moment she married Mr. Brennan. I suggest you accept that and move on with your life." Marcus's face went purple with rage. "She's my property. I have rights. You have nothing." Robertson interrupted coldly. "And if you continue to harass this family, I'll have you arrested for stalking and threatening behavior. I may be federal law, but even I can see when someone's in the wrong. Leave these people alone, Mr. Wade." "That's not a suggestion." Marcus looked between the Marshal, Thomas, and Eleanor, and finally seemed to understand he'd lost. The fury in his eyes promised that he'd never forgive, never forget, but he was beaten and he knew it. He rode away without another word, and Thomas knew with absolute certainty that they'd seen the last of Marcus Wade. Eleanor gave birth in September, during an early autumn storm that rattled the windows and painted the sky in shades of gray. Maria attended her alongside the doctor from town, while Thomas paced the parlor below like a caged animal. Jake had to physically stop him from running upstairs, 3 times when Eleanor's cries of pain filtered down. When the baby finally came, a daughter with her mother's gray eyes and a fury of dark hair, Thomas held her with hands that shook with wonder. Eleanor, exhausted but radiant, watched her husband cradle their child and felt a completeness she'd never imagined possible. "What should we name her?" Thomas asked, unable to look away from his daughter's tiny face. "Hope," Eleanor said softly, "because that's what you gave me and what she represents. Hope for a future worth living." Thomas sat on the edge of the bed, carefully placing baby Hope in Eleanor's arms. He leaned down to kiss his wife's forehead, then his daughter's, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his love for these 2 people. "Thank you," he whispered, "for staying, for choosing this life, for choosing me." Eleanor looked up at him with tears on her cheeks. "Thank you for giving me a choice, for showing me that love doesn't have to hurt, that marriage can be a partnership instead of a prison. You saved my life, Thomas, but more than that, you helped me learn to live again." Years would pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life. Cattle drives and harsh winters, good years and lean ones, more children born into a home filled with laughter and love. Eleanor would become known throughout the territory as Thomas Brennan's formidable wife, equally comfortable keeping books, treating injuries, and negotiating prices with cattle buyers. Their children would grow up strong and confident, taught by their parents' example what real partnership looked like. But on that September evening, with storm winds howling outside and a new life breathing softly in her mother's arms, the future was just a possibility stretching out before them. Thomas and Eleanor sat together in the lamplight, their daughter between them, and felt the weight of what they'd built together. Not just a marriage or a family, but a sanctuary where fear had no power and love was measured in daily choices to honor and cherish. The ranch would endure for generations, passed down through children and grandchildren, but its true legacy wasn't the land or the cattle or the buildings. It was the story of a woman who'd found the courage to run, and a man who'd had the wisdom to offer freedom instead of chains. It was the story of a proposal made not from desperation, but from genuine affection, and a marriage built on the radical idea that love should empower rather than imprison. As Thomas sat with his family, Listening to the storm rage outside, while warmth and peace filled the room, he thought about the day Eleanor had collapsed near Miller's Creek, half dead and wholly terrified. He thought about the moment he'd offered marriage, impulsive and earnest, and the way she'd whispered her fear of being sent back before accepting his proposal. He thought about all the moments since. The slow building of trust, the gradual healing of wounds, the unexpected joy of falling in love with his own wife. Eleanor caught him watching her and smiled, that radiant smile that transformed her face and reminded him why he'd fallen for her in the first place. She reached out her free hand, and he took it, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. Outside, the storm eventually passed, leaving the world washed clean and glittering with rain. Inside the Brennan Ranch house, a family settled into sleep, safe and whole and home at last. And if anyone had asked Eleanor whether she'd made the right choice that day, when she'd whispered her fear and accepted Thomas's proposal, she would have answered without hesitation. She'd chosen freedom. She'd chosen partnership. She'd chosen love. And in doing so, she'd helped create something neither of them could have built alone. A life worth living, a love worth fighting for, and a legacy that would endure long after the dust settled on the Wild West frontier.